Yes, welcome in. We are officially into the offseason. Badgers season officially came to an end on Saturday when Coastal Carolina won to wrap up the final spot in the bowl season. They ended up with 82 bowl teams, which is exactly the number that they needed to. So no 5-7 teams are going this year, which is the right way to do it. I know that there's not much of a difference between 6-6 and 5-7, but any team that's 2 games under 500 does not deserve to go to a bowl game. That's where I'm at. Like if you can finish the year 5-8, that just shouldn't happen. So either way, Wisconsin season is done. We're into the offseason, and that means the transfer portal's heating up. And we've got a great story from Jesse about talking to high school coaches about how Wisconsin is recruiting the state of Wisconsin. We'll get into that. And then also maybe touch on the early signing period, which is coming up here on Wednesday. Before we get to any of it, though, Home Field Apparel is the official apparel sponsor of the camp. They have the best vintage gear you could possibly find anywhere, college gear, not just Wisconsin, Big Ten, ACC, any conference you want. They've got a ton of it up on homefieldapparel.com. Go check it out and use the promo code Bucky24 for 15% off your first purchase. I think the Black Friday sale maybe still be going on today as well. But, yeah, go check it out. All right, let's jump into this, and we will start with the transfer portal because as we're doing this, and I'm fully aware that we are going to be outdated probably within 10 minutes of posting, but as we're doing this, Wisconsin has seen 3 guys go to the portal. We all already knew about Cole LaCrue, Jesse, but now Leon Lowry and Amari Snowden are also headed in. You had a chance to talk with both of those guys yesterday and get their view on why they're leaving. And I guess we can start with Lowry because he's the one that actually played this year. Was not the impact player that I think a lot of people thought he would have been or maybe were hoping for. Just 18 tackles, I think 1 sack. And I think just probably a little bit too quiet for a guy that you were counting on.
Very much so. A year ago, it was the most bizarre recruiting story I've ever covered, certainly transfer portal. He committed to Wisconsin after visiting on a Sunday, and he decommitted less than 24 hours later, said that all of his future recruitment was going to go through those 2 NIL agents. And a day later, fired those NIL agents, and by Thursday, recommitted to Wisconsin after outside linebackers coach Matt Mitchell flew out to meet with him. And I had a big story about it at the time, and it turned out that was the most notable thing that he did during his year at Wisconsin. Maybe that's not fair, but that's just what happened. And so now, after 1 season at Wisconsin, he is in the portal. He's got 1 year of eligibility left, and you're right, did not meet expectations. You could say that about a number of players, but based on what we saw in spring and even fall camp, I thought Lowry and John Pius, the transfer from William and Mary, were going to be difference makers, and they certainly weren't. Lowry ended up with 1 sack, 4 quarterback hurries. It wasn't enough, but
I'll let you finish in a second. I've seen the narrative out here that it's because they were going against Wisconsin's offensive line. That's why they had such great springs and great fall camps. This Wisconsin offensive line allowed the fewest sacks per game at Wisconsin for a Wisconsin offensive line since 2015. So it's not, let's just chill. Let's chill on the narrative that Wisconsin's offensive line was horrible and that's the only reason they were doing stuff. I don't know why they were unable to carry it over from practice. Is it a huge loss based on what we saw from him this year? No. But again, it sounds like there was a reason that he's not staying. And I think that's what he relayed to you.
Yeah. And you're right. This Wisconsin offensive line, I think on the whole, did a pretty decent job. They ranked tied for 3rd in the Big Ten in terms of fewest sacks allowed per game. So if you want to judge it on that.
And I also know that sacks are not the be all end all. Pressures are very, very important too. I get that. So I'm not saying that the offensive line was perfect by any stretch. They certainly had struggles in running the ball at times this year, but I thought protecting the quarterback, especially considering how many times they threw it, was not an area of huge concern.
Right.
So, but again, Leon Lowry.
Yeah. So this is what Lowry said. Obviously, all these players have exit meetings with the coaches when the season ends or close to when the season ends. And he met with Matt Mitchell, the outside linebackers coach, his position coach. And based on what Leon said to me, they wanted him to play next season with his hand in the ground. And he did not want to do that. He wants to be a stand-up edge rusher, which is something that he's done his entire football career. And that's what he said that he's looking for in his next school. And he talked about how this is a business decision. And you're going to hear that a lot because it's transfer portal era. There's money at play and there are no restrictions on how often you can transfer. But I wonder what this means on the whole for the defense and whether there are going to be more significant changes coming. Now, he made it clear. He said, I don't want to get into their business, but he did say that it sounded like there were at least some changes. Now, I don't know if it was a change specifically to how they wanted to use him. I said, well, did they want to use you the way they used Daryl Peterson this past season? Because we know Daryl's an outside linebacker, but there were situations where they would put his hand in the ground, and he said something like that. So, I don't know if, if it's a structure overhaul, maybe. I think very clearly they need to do something differently to better stop the run. And maybe they just want different kinds of bodies or to utilize these guys in different ways. But it sounds to me like that is literally the only reason why Leon is out of here, which is a reasonable reason. You can have any reason you want to go now, but if it's not going to be the spot that you thought you came in to play, then that makes sense. But obviously this is kind of the first of many dominoes that I suspect will fall. And unlike the other two guys in LaCrue and Snowden, this is at least a guy who started 11 of the 12 games at his position.
Yeah. In terms of the change, I've seen some people say, oh, they're going to dive into the 3-3-5. Like that's where they're going here. And if they're going to try and play a 200 and I guess he could put on some weight, but if they're going to try and play Leon Lowry with his hand on the ground, at 252 pounds is what he was listed at, they're going to get run over every single game. You can't consistently play like that. This more feels like they're potentially trying to go back to the 4-down lineman stuff that they originally went to Cincinnati with, and at 255, 260 with hand on the ground, that type of stuff. But he's too small to have his hand on the ground. Same thing with Daryl Peterson. And I know that they were not doing this necessarily on early rundowns. They were doing it more on the passing downs and where they had just one defensive lineman on the field. But, Daryl Peterson would have his hand on the ground. So I don't know exactly what it means, but if they're thinking they're going to play 255-pound guys on the line in the Big Ten, would have serious questions about their strategy here. But that's the thing. We don't know exactly what he meant or what exactly their idea here is, but I can't do it. Like the answer to not stopping the run or the inability to stop the run is not to put smaller guys up front.
Yeah. And it is cloudy again, in part because he didn't want to go, and he just has every right not to say anything, but whatever the detail was about the structure of the defense or what they want it to look like, maybe they thought they could put weight on him in some capacity. I truly don't know. And I think, look, we're very early in this process, but there has to be some defensive changes before the start of next season. I don't know whether that means staffing changes within that unit as a whole for the coaches, schematic changes. Maybe it's both, because they're nowhere near good enough. Certainly the talent level needs to be better, but you also have to put these guys in a better position to succeed. I also got some mentions on social media when I put that story out about, or even in the comments of the story, trying to read between the lines of, oh, Wisconsin basically said thanks, but no thanks, get out of here. And at least according to Leon, that was not the case. They wanted him to be here. He had no intention of leaving. Again, he's got another year of eligibility. He just transferred in from Syracuse a year ago. So he's got no hard feelings. It was just what they were asking him to do or how they thought he fit into the system was not something that he wanted to be a part of. So that's why he's on the way out. And again, business decision. You're going to consistently see this where guys are just on the move every year as soon as something doesn't fit what they want. And I'm not knocking it. It's just where we're at in college football with the transfer portal.
Yeah. Again, I when I saw your story, I went back and started trying to look and see like what kind of players they had at Cincinnati when they were running it in 2021 and like how they stopped the run. And I didn't get a full grasp on exactly who was where and what was what, but some of the guys, they're definitely were smaller and not smaller, but like 255, 260. Those are some of the guys that they had playing defensive line at Cincinnati, which again, I think you can do when you're playing in the AAC. I don't know that you can do that in the Big Ten. And even that group struggled to stop the run. I mean, they gave up 150 yards. They were one of the best defenses in the country that year, and they gave up 150 yards on the ground every game. So that has been I feel like that's always been a difficulty for Mike, just for Mike Tressel, to be fair, and just figuring out a way to stop the run. And he always, when we talked to him last week or 2 weeks ago now, we're this close. And I don't know that his defenses have always been this close. Maybe they're always this close. Maybe they just can't finish.
The 2021 defense, which is the one that he referenced when he came here, because Wisconsin's defense was number one in the country in run defense. Cincinnati's defense that year was number two in pass defense, which is why the total defense was as good as it was. But yeah, I don't see how what you did at Cincinnati will translate fully given the physicality of the Big Ten. But like, that's why he didn't do what he did at Cincinnati, at least in part, because they predominantly ran that so-called 3-3-5. And they didn't do it at all at Wisconsin here these first years, or at least generally speaking. A lot of it has looked kind of like the structure that Jim Leonhard had.
Right. It felt like they pulled it out at the beginning of last year and were like, I don't know. And because maybe they didn't have the pieces for it. Maybe they still don't have the pieces for it. But I don't have a problem with a 3-3-5 defense if you're actually going to stop the run. But if you're not going to stop the run, you have to put more big bodies up front. And you can still do that. They have their heavy nickel package, right? They have, which is, I guess, is kind of it can be a run stopping group, I guess. But it just, the 329 that I will put up is going to be very, very difficult for anybody to forget. And what they did with 2 defensive linemen on the field versus 3, and again, it's so much deeper than that. I know that, like, scheme and all that good stuff, but size matters in the Big Ten. And we've seen Wisconsin for 30 years just beat down on small little defensive lines, and it feels like Wisconsin's now that. But I guess we'll find out. Again, Leon Lowry's not the only one to hit the portal. Amari Snowden did as well. You had a chance to talk with him, and his reasoning, I believe, he would still be here if not for a certain coach.
That is right. He is leaving, and this is, again, his side of the story. I want to preface that before we even start here, because there are always 2 sides. Haven't had a chance to talk to Paul Haynes, and you don't know what that perspective is. This is just the perspective of someone who came in and didn't play and is leaving in large part because he's disgruntled with his role. But all I can go on is what he said. He said he would still be here if Paul Haynes wasn't here. He felt that he did not have a relationship with Paul. He said that, I said, did you have a conversation with him about wanting something more? And he said that his response was, I hear you, but he didn't feel like it was, I understand and I'm going to make a change. And Amari Snowden to me was probably the most fascinating prospect in the last recruiting class, or the first one that Luke Fickell and his staff brought here. He had been committed to Cincinnati for a long time because of how much he believed in Fickell. And then Luke came here and Amari followed him. And Amari is somebody who is a left-handed pitcher that could throw 90 plus miles per hour. He gave that up to come to a place that doesn't even offer a Division I college baseball program. And so he said that will be on the table wherever he goes next, though that's not the reason he's leaving. He talked to both Luke Fickell and Mike Tressel, and he said that he's got a lot of love for those guys. And he felt like when he had the conversation with them that they weren't BSing him. They were genuine and how hurt they were that he was leaving. And so, I mean, it's a 6'4" prospect, but he felt like Paul Haynes was not necessarily truthful with him in terms of what his role was going to be, because he thought he was going to be a contributor. And then Xavier Lucas passed him, and Amari said that he's got no, I mean, he certainly loves Xavier. He said he had just gotten off a conversation with Xavier after he announced his decision to transfer. But again, this is somebody who thought that he deserved to be playing and wasn't, and felt that he didn't have a strong enough relationship with Paul Haynes. And that is the only reason that he is on his way out.
So when you look at, when we saw Amari in fall camp, now obviously we have to at least acknowledge what he went through this year, right? Losing his mom the way that he did before the season. We have to, that certainly, I think, probably plays a significant role in his story. Now, again, as you said, if it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for what he viewed as a tough relationship with or a non-relationship with Paul Haynes, he'd still be here. But I also think certainly what he went through and that pain and the emotions that he went through, he's probably still feeling it a little bit. And I don't know that that's going to go away anytime soon for him. But I think he also said in his message that he was looking to find his confidence again. And I wonder, when you talk about the confidence aspect, is that because he wasn't getting anything from Paul Haynes?
Yeah, I specifically asked him about that because he said after he put that out, he was getting a lot of people asking about it. What does it mean that you want to find your love and confidence again? You're right. The part of the story that can't be overlooked is his mom passed away, right before the start of the season. Again, I think he felt like he got good support on the whole, but he didn't feel like he necessarily had it from his position coach. But when I said, "What do you mean by the love you're looking for?" Love to get your love and confidence back. He said it was specifically related to, again, the relationship he had with his position coach, the fact that he felt like he had done everything that he could and should be playing. And he thought he was told at the start of the season that he was going to be the guy after Nazir Forkurine. And again, ultimately somebody else emerged in that spot, that he lost his confidence and his love because, yeah, he wasn't getting shown that love back. So that's what he meant by that. And what he's looking for in his next school, he wants to play. He wants a relationship with his position coach. And that's his view on where things stand and why he's on the way out. But no doubt in the big picture, this is an interesting loss for Wisconsin. There are always going to be guys that come and go. But when you just looked at his measurables and his potential, he was really intriguing.
Yes, I would agree. Does he want to play baseball?
He said that's on the table. Now, I don't know exactly what that means. He's obviously still very young. You don't find left-handed pitchers who throw 90 plus miles per hour on trees. So it'll be interesting to see whatever his next school is and whether he tries to pursue both of those. But I also think if you want to be the very best football player you can be, it's very hard to do both of those sports. We know when baseball takes place, you essentially miss spring practice, which is key to your development. So not off the table is what he said.
Yeah. Will be interesting. Again, yeah, you're right. There are guys that we get very interested and excited about to see in recruiting classes, and then they get here and it just doesn't work out one way or the other. I mean, there's been a ton of guys like that. There was a guy that I think maybe we were talking about the other day when we were talking about Thomas Brown, like Arrington Farrar was a guy that they were very, very excited for, and he never found a position that worked for him. And it just, you get a 4-star recruit out of Georgia, a spot that you never do, and you're just really excited to see what he can do, and it ends up not working. We've seen it with bigger, we've seen it with more experienced guys or even higher rated guys. Feels like every 5-star recruit Wisconsin's ever gotten has been a washout. I think that's just because the last 2 have been. But at Wisconsin, I'm saying, obviously Logan Brown went and is starting this year at Kansas, and I'm sure Nolan Rucci will find his way into playing time at some point. He's a backup right now, which you could have done here too. But that's irrelevant. I just think that you always get these type of guys that come in and it just doesn't fit, whether it's personality wise or it's something here doesn't go right. Just because they're a 4-star guy, and we've talked, I mean, you've mentioned it quite a few times, 19 4-star recruits between the last 2 classes, they're not all going to hit. And I'm interested to see what happens with him. Do you think he's still a corner, you think?
As opposed to a safety?
Yeah. That's tough, I know.
Yeah. It depends on the scheme and what coaches view him as. I certainly think he's capable of doing both. So either way, you're getting a guy that's 6'4", 212 pounds who can run and do everything that you would want. It's just, can you get him seasoned enough to be ready for the moment?
So again, as we're doing this, there's 3 guys in. There will be other guys that join them, and we will be outdated. But those are the 3 that we know of right now. And I would say that obviously there's going to be more. My question, just not looking for anything deep here, but where do they need to add?
Where do they need to add? Well, I think you have to start at quarterback. And again, I don't know what the numbers are going to be in terms of scholarship guys that come back. Ideally, it seems like 4 is a decent number, but maybe they end up with 5. It's very clear that you need better play there. And frankly, I've said this before, you need certainty going into year 3. You need something you can bank on where you've got something. And even if you get a portal guy, you don't necessarily know, because we saw the first 2 years, but I would start there. Beyond that, the hard part here is not knowing how many guys are going to leave and what spots are open. So if you lose 12 guys and all of a sudden 3 of them are cornerbacks, you're going to need to fill it. But if I just had to say, where do you need to upgrade talent? I mean, everywhere. Like, is there a tight end there that can actually produce for you more consistently, or is that something they even necessarily want in this system? They've got a bunch of wide receivers still, but more playmakers off the edge. Like, I feel like I could go down the list, but if you've got a hierarchy, I'd love to know where your top few are.
I mean, quarterback is obviously the top, but then it goes to defensive line.
Yeah.
Easily defensive line, because it's the hardest spot to fill.
Yes.
By far the hardest spot to fill in the portal. Recruiting wise, they've tried both portal and high school, but it's the toughest spot to fall. It's the toughest spot to fill because everybody else is looking for those guys too. But that to me would be the top priority, would be defensive line after quarterback, after finding something with quarterback. But again, everyone is going to do that. I would assume that they're going to add edge guys, but again, we don't. What's this going to look like? We don't know if they're making changes, if they're making significant changes where they're not going to need the type of outside linebackers Wisconsin has played with for the last decade. Well, then I'm not exactly sure what it is, but defensive line, no matter the system you're playing, has to be a top priority after quarterback.
Yeah, it does. The hard part is, I just feel after watching this for 2 years, the transfer portal is way more of a crapshoot than I ever thought it was going to be, because supposedly it'd be easier than high school because you have actual college film, but yet you just never know whether it's going to translate into a new system. I didn't think Elijah Hills was going to be the guy that ended up playing a bunch. I know I said that before. I thought it would be Brandon Lane, and it certainly wasn't. So you're right. You're going after guys that everybody else is going after. Think about Jamel Howard, for example, the recruit who ended up recommitting to the Badgers a couple classes ago. Look, that was a huge win at the time, and it still may end up being a huge win when Greg Scruggs was here. He wasn't like a 4-star defensive lineman or a 5-star guy, but because that position was so hard to find, everybody was coming after him at the end.
Yeah. So far, his career kind of mimics Jeremy Patterson. Do you remember Jeremy Patterson?
I do.
Yeah. Where you think and you see the size and you talk to everybody and they're like, yeah, he's going to play. It hasn't happened yet, but he's only 2 years in. It's not like it's done if he can't. But Dylan Johnson and Ben Barton, who we already talked about, obviously back. Kurt Neal, Brandon Lane has another year, and Jamel Howard and Ernest Willer, I believe, is going to be back on the defensive line as well. So like they have bodies there, but you would hope that they can find something somewhere to be like the impact that Elijah Hills had. I mean, I'll take Elijah Hills every year. Like, you know what I mean? In terms of being able to get after the quarterback and create pressure, he was by far, I mean, he may be, in terms of defensive lineman, maybe up there with anybody we've seen in the last decade, numbers wise, I'm saying. Yeah, I mean, I think back to Alec
James, Connor Sheehy, Chikwe.
Yeah, Alec James. I think about Alec James. I think he ended up with like 5 or 6 sacks as a senior in 2017. That was kind of, I think, the most production, and Hills has kind of matched that. Now, again, he's not an NFL body like Keanu Benton or anything like that, and he probably was not as good against the run as you would like. But getting after the quarterback, he definitely surprised, I think, quite a few people. But yeah, that would be where I'm at in terms of who needs, like, what positions they need to get. Here's the thing: you add good players anywhere. If you've got a guy out there in the portal that's better than somebody you have on your team, go after him. It's difficult because people are trying to do the exact same thing. All right, let's transfer into. That's a good one, Zach. Was not intentional, but let's change here into the story that you had for Monday morning up on The Athletic. It was a look inside Wisconsin's efforts at recruiting the state of Wisconsin, something that is always a topic among fans. I feel like there's certain things that fans get hooked on: in-state recruiting, students being how the students get into Camp Randall, or under center, or in shotgun, like grab onto certain things and never let go. In-state recruiting is one of those things because that's what Barry Alvarez built this program on. It was shutting down everybody else, keep putting up a wall, and that wall stood for quite some time, from him until Brett. And then obviously we've seen some differences here in the last 5 or 6 years. But either way, you had an opportunity to chat with a bunch of high school coaches, gave them an ability to speak however they wanted to speak. And certainly some of them were more impressed or more encouraged by the Wisconsin coaching staff than others. But for you, I always do this with your stories, is what's the biggest thing that stood out to you?
Right. So first of all, I did this story 3 years ago when Paul Christ was the coach, and wanted to run it back now because Luke Fickell and his staff have now been here for 2 years, which I think is enough time to try to make inroads. And we actually have some data on how they've done in terms of landing kids. And it ended up being 8 high school coaches that I talked to from across the state that had, I think, a combined 148 years of head coaching experience. And these are not coaches who are coaching some podunk school that they have opinions and haven't talked to this staff. All of these coaches are at schools that have some dudes and that they interacted with the staff. And I think that's important. Look, the reviews are mixed. I think it was really fascinating because of how mixed these reviews are. Yes, in-state recruiting as a whole has been so important here for such a long time. On the other hand, we know how the landscape has changed. How many guys from the state of Wisconsin are going to be 4 or 5-star guys, and how many guys are this staff going after from outside the state? Overall, I think what's interesting is Luke Fickell has made it clear from the outset that in-state recruiting still matters. They got 3 guys on scholarship in the 2024 class. The early signing period is this Wednesday, which is why I published the story now. They're going to sign 5 in-state guys on scholarship. They also have a walk-on in Eric Schmidt, who's a kicker who eventually will be on scholarship. But at the same time, you look, and during those 2 cycles, there were 6 4-star prospects from the state. Wisconsin didn't land any of them. And I think that is what shapes part of this narrative is, oh, for years, they got everybody. And that's basically true. Other than Ben Bredesen, for like an 8-year stretch, Paul Christ got everybody. On the other hand, things have changed. You have NIL, you have other schools with access to these players, you have more interactions on social media, and all 6 of those guys didn't come to Wisconsin for various reasons. We know there were a couple guys at Catholic Memorial in Waukesha that this staff didn't necessarily move forward with. We know that, for example, Nathan Roy, the 4-star, was not from Wisconsin originally and picked the Gophers. And of course, you have James Flanagan, whose dad played at Notre Dame, so he's going to Notre Dame, and Trey Poteet, whose dad used to be on staff at Wisconsin and isn't here anymore. Of those 6, I'd say the only one that they should have gotten was Garrett Sexton, the offensive lineman who they offered late and they didn't get. But some coaches think this staff has said one thing and done another, where they said they were going to come in and make it a priority and they feel like they haven't heard from him. And other people say they've got to go after the best players. And if they're not inside this state, then they have to go elsewhere. So that's kind of the general overarching theme of this story. But I'd certainly encourage everybody listening and watching to read it, because there are a lot of varying perspectives that I think at least shed some light on how important people in this state feel about what the staff is doing in terms of recruiting in Wisconsin.
I know you asked some of the folks, like, who stood out to them of Wisconsin staff, like who's your best relationship with? And I thought that there were, a number of interesting answers, as in, like, maybe they don't have a relationship, a good relationship, I should say, somebody that they talk to on a regular basis from the program.
I think the thing that surprised me most was that the majority of coaches said Devin Spalding was kind of the guy that had impressed them the most with his energy, enthusiasm, and youth. And I think why it surprises me is just the few interactions that we've had with him. He doesn't reveal very much, which is certainly his prerogative. Some coaches don't want to say a whole lot to us, but he clearly projects a different image when he goes out and recruits. And it does seem like it's like, so for Paul Christ, it was Chris Herring. He was the in-state guy, and they had one go-to who would canvass the state. And it doesn't necessarily seem like that's the approach that they have. I think even, I want to say when I talked to Luke first about this a couple summers ago, maybe it was like 4 coaches who had different areas. And I would also say some of these coaches said they talked to Phil Longo and Mike Tressel, but obviously Phil's no longer on the staff. But you're right. There are some coaches who they don't necessarily know who their point of contact is. I think part of this as well is not all of these schools are going to have a guy every year. Some of them are, but they feel like they'd like to be able to have better communication with these guys, that they're not just showing up when they have somebody. And that part can be important. I think it's such a delicate situation in how you handle in-state recruiting, because for so long it was a certain way. And as one coach said, when you don't have that anymore, it feels like there's a piece missing.
it certainly feels like that. Do you think Wisconsin? So it's not just the position coaches. Obviously, this has changed completely in terms of how recruiting is handled, not just in state but nationally. We know about Max and Pat and the staff that they have, and they're certainly in contact with these people or these coaches as well. But do they need more people to be involved in this? Like, is the staff big enough to be able to hold relationships with everybody and not just be like checking in every month or two?
I would think that it's big enough if you make it a priority. And I'm not suggesting this staff doesn't make it a priority because, again, these are just perspectives of different coaches who always want their kids to be Wisconsin guys and always think there are more people who should be playing for the Badgers. I do look, it's very clear that what they've done out of state is on a different level here. And you're right. They've got almost 24-star guys in the last two classes. None of them are from the state. But it's how do you choose to build your program? And do you feel like in-state guys need to be the backbone of that? I think they can do it. And I also think there's a lot of questions that I asked here. Does it even matter anymore in terms of in-state guys if it just is about NIL and transfer portal and getting the best players that you can find? And one coach said he used Hunter Wohler as an example of here's a kid who, and I think it's a reasonable example, like just in-state kid who wanted so badly to be a part of this program, picked Wisconsin over Ohio State, could have gone anywhere, was the highest rated defensive back that they'd gotten from the state at the time, and stayed all 4 years. Probably if he wasn't from the state, I'm guessing after his junior year, might have gone somewhere else because it just didn't matter as much. Look, how many guys are there going to be on the roster that are like that? I don't know, but I think it's fair to say that something is lost here when you start getting guys who don't necessarily have ties to this place and don't feel the same way about it. It doesn't mean they're going to put any less effort into it when they're here, but it's all part of the new dichotomy of what college football looks like and how this staff is trying to get better players.
This is something we talked about last year. I understand that college football has changed, and the idea that they're going out nationally and recruiting the way they are, that's fantastic. I still think, and I think they still believe that it should be easier and should be more consistent to recruit in state. You should be able, if you're able to get 4 stars from out of state to come here, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to keep 4-star guys here. I know but again, I know the landscape has changed, money has changed, and all that aspect to it. But I feel like the one consistent thing that you have, no matter what, is this school is in Wisconsin. The school is in Madison. So assistant coaches come and go. Colin Hitcher comes and go. Like guys like Colin Hitcher come and go, right? What he did on the East Coast last year, very, very impressive. But when he leaves, does Wisconsin still have those connections out there? Probably not. Like in terms of like how good they feel about sending guys to Wisconsin, because Colin was such a dynamite recruiter. Wisconsin, the one thing that they have, they're right here. And those are guys that grow up around it. And the problem I think also Wisconsin's running into is they haven't been very good of late. And when when we're talking about guys that were coming in, in 14 and 15 and 16, they were growing up when Wisconsin was winning 3 straight Big Ten titles. And so they had seen success. And the guys that are growing up now for the last 5 years or so have not seen very much Wisconsin success. I think that may also play a role in it. But this started to wane under Paul Chryst, and obviously they haven't been able to turn it around yet. They've been able to buffer that by throwing so many 4-star guys from out of state back in it. But I do think that there is a bigger connection and a more vital link between player and school if you are from the state. That's not to say that other guys from out of state don't don't love Wisconsin or don't feel some way about Wisconsin, but it has to be at least a little bit in someone's mind I can leave, and it's not like I'm not disappointing my home state.
I feel the same way, and we know it's harder than ever now to make sure you get the top kids because of what's available with money and access that these coaches have to kids and when they offered him. I had one coach talking about the offensive lineman from Pewaukee who got, an Ole Miss.
I like that way you said that.
Yeah. I sound like someone who didn't grow up here. Pewaukee. Easy for me to say.
I wonder if that's how it was pronounced back, made it kind of
Pewaukee, according to Alice Cooper.
Yeah.
Shout out Wayne's World if you're in the 40 plus.
Milwaukee.
Anyway, just all these schools have access to these kids earlier, and so it is harder than ever to get them, but that shouldn't be an excuse because, again, you are Wisconsin. I think they certainly want these guys, but it's definitely a significant challenge.
It is. And I'm sure people are going to be upset. Like, you don't have to get your players from the state. Certainly understand that. I just think it's a consistent thing at Wisconsin. Like, you are, as I said, the school's not going anywhere. This is where people are from, and that should be the benefit of always that being the consistency of it. You're not always going to have the same assistant coaches that have certain areas in the country that they can go and recruit. Wisconsin's it. But you don't need to get all your players from Wisconsin. I'm not saying that whatsoever. You just want to keep the best ones home. And
yeah. Well, I didn't mean to interrupt, Zach. I'd also say this kind of piggybacks on the story I did a couple weeks ago about how many in-state guys are even on the roster now. This is the lowest number they've had in however many years. It's been 15 plus years. It was when I went back and studied it. And so it's one thing to say, oh, a guy like Hunter Wooler is more apt to stay. But look at some of the guys they lost. They were in-state guys. Chimere Dike was an in-state guy. They lost, obviously, a number of walk-ons. So I don't even know if that's necessarily true. I think they feel more pride for the program, but are they willing to stick it out and stay? That remains to be seen as we go through this transfer portal process, because if they're not playing or they don't like what's happening, I think guys are going to leave even if they're from the state.
Do you think Chimere Dike leaves if Paul Chryst was still the coach?
No, but that's another.
All right, so let's stop it then.
Well, that's another thing here too.
Yeah, exactly. Chimere Dike is a horrible example for that. Just I'm not trying to be a dick, but that's just it's a horrible example.
Well, every situation is different here. And I think this is another challenge that they face too. And one of the coaches talked about this is because you have a new staff where nobody has any relationships with them, all these other programs can come in and they're basically on the same playing field for, and I'm talking about that at the high school level, like getting kids. If they can get in the door and develop a relationship, they might have a better chance at these kids than even Luke Fickle and his staff does. Yeah. Okay. The DK example is an outlier, but the point that I'm making is I think in-state guy, like you can say a guy like Hunter Wooler is more likely to stay, and that may be true. But I also think on the whole, I don't know that you can say just because these guys love Old State U, they're going to stick around, because if they're not getting opportunities or they don't like what's happening, they're more apt to go than ever before. So that is part of the challenge here in building this wall around the state and keeping these guys, because they might not end up at Wisconsin in 3 years.
I totally agree with you. I'm just saying DK is a bad example. The example I think that would maybe even would work here is Trey Wettig.
Yeah.
Who never got an opportunity, like wasn't getting opportunities, wasn't playing. If he was a starter, maybe it's different. And maybe he was getting more opportunities. But he goes to Indiana as a starter there on a team that is going to play in the college football playoff, and it was a great move for him. He's from the state, but it made sense for him to move on. And I don't know that it would have mattered who the coach was, because he wasn't getting opportunities. So that I think that's a good example. But yeah, it is what it is. Sorry, wasn't trying to be a dick. It just comes out naturally. Was there anything else you wanted to hit on in that story?
No, we pretty well covered it. I mean, like everybody's got their own interpretation and perspective on where things stand and the job Wisconsin is doing and how much it matters in the state. But it was certainly fascinating to listen to 8 different perspectives of guys who certainly know what's going on in this state and have quality players.
I know another guy that, like, because of what he has said since going to the NFL and some of his issues, but like Braylon Allen's another guy that grew up wanting to play at Wisconsin. He could have gone pretty much anywhere for whatever position they wanted him for, and he wanted to come to Wisconsin, and he almost left, but then stayed around and had the Wisconsin necklace. Like, there are certain guys that fall in love with the program and have been in love with the program their entire lives, and I don't like those are the type of guys that you absolutely have to get. And there are fewer and fewer of those guys, I think, as we get into this new era of portal, NIL. And we've seen, we're getting to the point where it's kind of like basketball now, where these guys have the ability to go to all these camps and go and see everything and be everywhere. And the draw to the home school is not as much as it once was. And basketball's been like that for a long time now, and football seems to be going that same way too. Right? Like the AAU circuit just made it so you could go and see anybody and see anywhere and get so much exposure that people were aware of you. And now, and football has kind of turned into that exact same thing. All these guys are very aware of people in Wisconsin. And I think that 2022 class, what Penn State did, what Ohio State did, coming in here and taking the guys that they did, and Notre Dame for that matter, and then obviously the 23 class as well with Penn State, it just opened everybody's eyes, be like, we can go in there and take who we want. We can go in there and get whoever we want. It's not, there's no wall there anymore. And so I don't think Wisconsin's ever going to be able to put that wall back up. Like,
Yeah.
I just think this is where it's at now.
In the basketball comparison, it was never an apples to apples comparison. And this came up a lot during that stretch, especially at the end or when Paul was having a lot of success and they were getting the top 5 or 6 guys in the state every year. Why can't they do that in basketball? It's always been different with basketball, with AAU, with the way these guys were traveling at such a young age, with the exposure they had to other programs. It was just different. With football, you're right. I think we're heading more and more in that direction. And it's more so, I look at it, the high level guys. I still think Wisconsin is going to get a lot of these 3-star in-state guys because the Badgers make them a priority. And you're not going to have Ohio State, Penn State, some of these schools that recruit nationally going after a 3-star kid from Wisconsin. To me, the biggest challenge is those 4. And even if there's an occasional 5-star guy, they're getting attention from when they're freshmen in high school, and they're getting it from everyone. And again, like I said before, it's even more challenging now with a staff that didn't have those ties. So all these other schools can come in and feel like they can break down that door. And I think all it takes is one to kind of get that boulder rolling. You get Jerry Cross going to Penn State, and then 2 years later in the 2024 class, you obviously have Corey Smith, Donovan Harbor, Garrett Sexton. So you have in-state guys who see, oh, here's a path forward for me, and it's not just at Wisconsin. And also these schools can offer money, maybe even more than Wisconsin. So I think I'm with you, Zach. I don't think that it's ever going to be the same, and I'm not like lamenting the way things are. You just have to be able to figure out how to have success in a different way.
Like, this isn't 1990 and Barry Alvarez coming in and being like, watching all these kids go to Iowa and go to places that are Notre Dame and just going to all these different places. That's not this situation. Like, and he came in and wanted to shut it down. That's not the situation anymore. And obviously the scholarship limit, when it went from whatever it was down to 85, certainly helped Wisconsin's cause. I'm interested to see how this new stuff affects their walk-on program too. It sounds like they're still going to cap it at 85 in the Big Ten, kind of like the SEC is doing in terms of scholarship, but the rosters can't be any bigger than 105. How does that impact the walk-ons, especially because a lot of those guys are coming from within the state, I should say. And we know Wisconsin's walk-on program, how vital it was to their success over these last 30 years. So there's a lot of unknown there too.
Very much so. I mean, I think that's the best case scenario for Wisconsin is if it's capped at 85, because if you just had 105 scholarships, then as a staff, you have to decide, well, is it worth handing out a scholarship to a guy who we really don't feel is a scholarship guy, but we want to keep him here because the in-state matters, or are we going after more national guys? On the other hand, if you've got that many scholarships, there are going to be plenty of unhappy kids who roll out of this program every year. So I know that the walk-on program, at least based on what Luke says, matters because of the history and tradition here, but it remains to be seen how they choose to handle that moving forward.
It is. Let's transition here into the early signing period, which is Wednesday, or I should say starts Wednesday, and Wisconsin expected to get most of its class on the dotted line by that day, and unless there's some late changes, of course, you just never know. But we're going to talk about this more on Thursday when we come back, because we'll get a chance to talk to Luke Fickell and then Max and Pat on Wednesday. So we'll be talking about it on Thursday. But for you, this class, what has you intrigued? I don't want to say excited, because you're not an excitable guy when it comes to things that, you very laid back. But what has you intrigued about this class?
From an individual standpoint, there's a few guys that stand out. Certainly Carter Smith. You don't always go get a 4-star top 15 quarterback, especially one who comes off the board a month before the early signing period, who's going to be here in the spring. I don't know that he's going to be ready right away, but if you're getting that guy, it's because you believe he has the potential to be the future for you at quarterback. So I would start with him, and how whoever the next offensive coordinator can mesh his ability to be a dual threat guy. Defensively, I feel like the man crush is ultimately going to end up being on Mason Posa, the kid from New Mexico, is the #1 player in the state there. I look at him and I get like the Leo Chanel, Nick Herbig vibes of like, this dude looks like he maybe is the next great linebacker at Wisconsin where he can just wreak havoc. Now, there's a long way to go between what you do in high school and what you do at Wisconsin and obviously into the NFL. But that is one that I look at and go, okay, you're a program that says you want to be able to recruit nationally. You just showed it to me with that pickup because he could have gone anywhere. Oregon was in his top 3 and he ends up picking the Badgers. So, but again, they've got 8 4-star 24/7 composite guys. Eugene Hilton is another one whose dad, T.Y. Hilton, obviously was an NFL wide receiver. Eugene is a 4-star wide receiver and I think can potentially be a difference maker as a 6'2 guy. So there are a number of players. They're not going to hit on all of them, but you better start hitting on some of these guys who can be difference makers early if you want to elevate this program.
I'm also intrigued by Jalen Williams because if what Leon Lowry is saying, where there's going to be a change, he calls himself an edge. I don't know that he is. Do you agree? I mean, he's 6'6".
They're recruiting him as an outside linebacker, even though obviously that's a kind of a defensive line body. And I think I said this before on the show we did after he flipped. Like, they don't have 6'6" outside linebackers other than Aaron Witt, and this dude is more athletic than that.
Right. Again, but I'm curious as to what they told him about the defense and what they're looking at and trying to do with the defense. I think that at least is notable for me. But again, it's the offensive line. They went and added a bunch in the last class. I think it was 5 in the last class. It's 4 right now. So you've added 9 offensive linemen in the last 2 years. A couple of really good ones in this class, including Hardy Watts, who you beat out some very high-level programs to get. So it's unfortunate because you kind of have to wait to see those guys. You're not expecting to see them early on. But I think the class that is true freshmen now, we're going to see a ton of those guys next year. Specifically, Kevin Haywood, I know he played a ton of games this year, but probably will slot into a starting spot, assuming everything goes the way that he wants it to. And then Emerson Mandel, what exactly his role could be. There are some things that we're not, I know we're talking about the 25 class, but the 24 class is now after a year. We'll see what they've got along the offensive line coming in next year. Thomas Heiberger and that type of stuff, like the guys that we were excited to see in fall camp, and injury kind of hampered his inability to get on the field this year. But we'll see. Again, signing day coming up here on Wednesday, or the early signing period on Wednesday, and then the transfer portal officially opens next. Is it Monday? Right? Because it's the 9th, and it's open until the 28th. Though players who play in bowl games, you get another 5 days after that if it's past December 28th, and you don't actually have to choose a team until you want to. You just have to be in the portal by the 28th. Jesse, we will be, for anybody wonder, we're going to be doing the swing coming up on Wednesday. Wisconsin is going to play Michigan on Tuesday night and try and stay unbeaten, get to 9-0, and then we'll be talking about it coming up on Wednesday, so go subscribe for that too. Jesse, thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach.
All right, there is Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Camp.